Hello, and welcome to the Shipwreck Archive.
Thank you. We're looking for the shipwrecked romance of Ava and Thomas.
Here we are. Enjoy!
The letters and telegraphs were a constant, all from a nation who had held a great interest in the events that had unfolded on Saturday, the 1st of June, 1878. A good deal of them suggested that Ava Carmichael, age 18, and Thomas Pierce, age 20, should definitely get married to one another. Surely it was fate that had washed them onto the Victoria coastline in Australia together, the only survivors of the ill-fated iron-hulled bark, the Loch Ard. What better way to end such a thrilling and romantic story? He had pulled her from the grasp of the water like the stable boy in a fairy tale. Had he not earned the hand of the princess? The voyage of the Loch Ard had certainly not started in such dramatic fashion, though some people seemed to have mixed feelings about the ship line and the ship herself. It was not that the Loch line had poorly kept ships. Their ships were always clean, sturdy, and well painted. It was also not as though they hired inexperienced and poor sailors and officers. Their men seemed to be men of the sea who also understood their duty to their passengers. It was simply that the Loch line seemed to have terrible luck, and the Loch Ard did not seem to be any exception. She had lost her mast twice on her maiden voyage, and her captain had died. Now she was sailing from Glasgow to Melbourne under the Captain George Gibb, an experienced captain, though one more accustomed to the coasts of America than the voyage to Melbourne. He was also only 28 years old. He had just married before leaving port in Glasgow. There were 37 passengers and 17 crew members aboard the ship for her last voyage. The passengers included people with wealth, including Ava's family. Her father was a doctor who was moving his family for a change of climate. He had found himself suffering from tuberculosis, and he felt as though the weather in Australia would be better suited for his health. The ship was also filled with some valuable luxury goods to please the upper classes and government of Australia. The prized item was a 5-foot Minton earthenware peacock statue that was intended for the Grand Exhibition of 1880 in Melbourne. That was a trip it was to finally finish, though 100 years later. As the ship neared the Australian coast, fog set in. It was thick and heavy, mixing with choppy waves, though nothing close to a full gale. In the low visibility, Captain Gibb was not able to see important landmarks, such as the lighthouse that should have warned him off of the course he was on. Though they were almost to the end of their voyage, the furthest they had made it was Mutton Bird Island. Captain Gibb did realize his mistake. Desperately, he had had the anchors lowered, and he did everything he could to keep her off of the shore. Unfortunately, it was too little, too late. Her anchors dragged, and she struck. It was more of the middle of the night, rather than the middle of the morning, when Ava Carmichael was thrown from her bunk by the crashing of the ship into the rocks. Disoriented, she ran onto the deck to discover chaos. The masts had crashed down as the ship had struck, crushing the passengers as they came rushing onto the deck and preventing the launch of the lifeboats. People were panicked, crew and passengers alike. Captain Gibb was doing his best to see the safety of everyone, remaining steadily at his post. Seeing the young woman running onto the deck, he took one of the lifebelts and a spar of the ship and fastened it to her. When the ship sank or came apart, everyone's best hope would be to have something that floated close to hand. It took about 10 minutes for the 1,693-ton ship to completely sink, taking majority of those who had been on board down with her. Many of the people who had been on board had not even had a chance to come on deck or realize what was happening before she was already underwater. The people who were in the water could be considered the lucky ones, Ava Carmichael and Thomas Pierce among them. The ordeal was not over yet, however. The waves were not kind, the water was cold, and the coast did not offer any sandy beaches readily available for the shipwrecked survivors to crawl onto. Ava clung to her ship's spar, while Thomas Pierce climbed onto a table, both allowing the water to buffet them for hours. The apprentice midshipman watched for his chance to reach the shore safely. Finally, the waves calmed some, and the tide came in, washing Thomas Pierce to a place where he could see a gorge with a welcoming beach. He released the table that had served as his lifeboat and swam. Thomas Pierce had only just made the shore and started to get his bearings when he began to hear the shouts of Ava Carmichael in the distance. Not willing to leave another survivor to their fate, he once more returned into the ocean. There he found Ava clinging to a chicken coop that she had found, exhausted and suffering from exposure, clearly not prepared to continue holding on for much longer. He took her nightdress in his teeth and began to swim for the shore. Once on shore, Thomas did his best to take care of Ava's immediate needs. He had no means to make a fire, but he was able to find a small cave and some rushes with which to make a bed for her. Thomas was even able to find some brandy from what was being washed on shore from the wreck, and he gave her some in the hopes that it would revive her. No matter his efforts, though, it was clear that Ava was in no condition to travel, and Thomas needed to go get help. The coast of Victoria, where the Loch Ard went down, has been dubbed the Shipwreck Coast for a reason. The locals were no strangers to wrecks happening on their shores, and they quickly came to help when roused by Thomas and told what was happening. When they returned to the gorge that he had led them to, however, there was no Ava, only the bodies of the dead that were starting to wash ashore in silent tribute to the horrors of the night. It was only after some searching that they discovered her in a new hiding place. After the trauma of the night, mixed with the knowledge that she was on a strange shore far away from home, Ava had been terrified to hear the sounds of the rescuers, imagining that they were people coming to attack her, and she had done what she could to hide herself where no one could find her. It had almost killed her. By the time they found her, she was in no condition to be moved, and they were forced to set up a fire by her and stay by her side overnight until she had recovered enough to come with them to safety. It was a sort of story that the newspapers and the general public loved, and word of the events of the night of June 1st traveled far past the shores of Australia. Some people expressed concern that a young lady and a young man had spent the evening together without a chaperone, but most people were willing to overlook the potential damage to Ava's reputation with a dire situation in mind. Of far greater interest to the general reading public was the very important question of when the two were going to get married. They were to be disappointed. Ava would later admit that, possibly due to public pressure, Thomas had asked if she would marry him, but she had turned him down. Not only did he already have a fiancée in Scotland, but they also had absolutely nothing in common. Not to mention the class difference between the daughter of a doctor and an apprentice midshipman. After having been exhibited around Victoria for a time, they both went their separate ways. Instead of Ava's hand in marriage, Thomas received a £1,000 reward and a medal for his bravery. He then returned to his life on the sea, still sailing with the lock line, and eventually making captain. Ava, meanwhile, returned to her home of Ireland, no longer having any reason to remain in Australia. The wreck of the Loch Ard still needed to be dealt with, however, and salvage operations were soon commenced. Much of the more successful salvaging happened from locals pilfering items off the beaches as they washed ashore. One of the many things that washed ashore was the famous Minton peacock, only suffering from a chip to its beak from its adventure. It was to serve as a hallway decoration for the next several decades, and was even finally shown in the exhibition hall in 1980 for the Centennial Grand Exhibition only 100 years late. The more legitimate salvage operations met with less success, however. One of the more major salvage attempts ended when the salvage ship Napier struck a rock and sank in Port Campbell Bay. The coast was still as dangerous as ever. There the Loch Ard sat until she was rediscovered in the 1960s. Unfortunately, her life has continued to be fraught with destruction even after her lengthy rest on the bottom of the ocean. Unsanctioned salvage from her has involved illegal blasting and artifacts being illegally removed from her. This has resulted in many attempts to protect her and the items that remain for generations to come, including registering her as an historic shipwreck and removing some of the items and placing them in museums to prevent less scrupulous hands from getting a hold of them. In modern day, the wreck is a popular diving location and tourist destination. There was to be another shipwreck in Thomas Pierce's life, however, on another Loch Line ship. The Loch Ard wrecked on the 11th of January, 1879, off Ballywater in Ireland, where it struck a reef, Thomas Pierce on board. This, too, was a coast prone to shipwrecks, just like the coast of Victoria near what is now called Loch Ard Gorge. It is said that Ava Carmichael once told a group of people she was playing cards with that she had lived on this coast for a while with her husband. Indeed, she was often called to offer aid to those who had shipwrecked on the coast. Then Ava claimed something that shocked everyone at the table. She had helped to save Thomas Pierce, who had once again found himself in the cold water. Whether or not this is true, no one knows, but it does make a good story. For more information, please see the Daily Telegraph article, "Only 2 people survived the wreck of the Loch Ard on Victoria's shipwrecked coast," from June 1st, 2018, and the sources in the description below. Thank you for listening.
Thank you for visiting the Shipwreck Archives. See you soon.